Good morning, everybody. The title of this research is BTEX Atmospheric Levels and Health Risk in a Urban Site in Ciudad del Carmen, Campeche. The authors are presented on a screen in a Severino Areli Vichique Morales. We talk about the subject. The air pollution has become a topic of interest not only for the scientific community, it also for the population in general, because a poor air quality is closely related to the health of the population, because this probably causing respiratory disease and some types of cancer. It's important to mention within the box is a group called BTEX, whose acronym stand for a benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene, which can be used as markers of damage to human health. And we can be considering both carcinogenic and non-carcinogenic effects. The objective for this research is to determine the levels, origin, and diurnal variation of BTX in ambient air of an urban site in Ciudad del Carmen, Campeche during the spring season 2022, as well as the risk that these compounds represent to the health of the exposed population. Well, the methodology is this. First, we have the site description plus gas chromatography sample analysis with flame ionization, detection CGDIF, plus statistical analysis, plus meteorological analysis, and then we have the health risk analysis. For the site description, the sampling was carried out at the facilities of the Autonomous University of Carmen in the facilities of the Language Center during the spring season from June 6 to 2022. We selecting this period because it is a dry season and when the lowest speed occur, which either the dispersion of the pollutes will result in higher concentration of this and greater risk in the population via inhalation. In this site, we done 3 samples were carried out per day. First was in the morning from 7 to 8 a.m. The second was in the evening from 2 to 3 p.m. And the third was at the night from 6 to 7 p.m. In the figure number 1, we can see that the sampling site is on a busy street, since it is close to hospital and even on the same avenue as the Ciudad del Carmen airport. In addition, a larger part of the population and public transport pass through the street, and this may be contributing to the concentration that we found in this site in Ciudad del Carmen. For the BTX samples in the ambient air, the samples were collected from June 6 to 10, 2022 to determine BTX concentration in the ambient air by activity sampling by piping air through the glass tube packet. We can see in the figure number 3. With active carbon at the constant and controlled flow of the 1.5 liters per minute by means of the SKC vacuum pump model, PCXR4. We can see in the figure number 2, the vacuum pump, is. And also the sample lasts 1 hour for each sample, considering 3 different periods the time according to the population activity observed in the city. Well, for the part of the gas chromatography sample analysis with flame ionization detection, CGDIF, we done the desorption for this sample was carried out in a glass vials with a sealed stopper with 1 milliliter of carbon disulfide. The samples were analyzed based on the method determination of aromatic hydrocarbons, benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylenes, and in the air absorption method in active carbon gas chromatography of the National Institute of Safety in Hygiene, Spain. At the thermoscientific brand trace HC ultra gas chromatograph was used in a splitters mode, a couple to the flame ionization detector using extra dry air and ultra high purity hydrogen and ultra pure nitrogen as a carrier gas. Well, in the figure number 5 shows how the desorption with a carbon disulfide was carried out. In the figure number 6 show the equipment used. In the figure number 7 show how the injection were performed. For the statistical analysis, we used normality analyses were performed to determine whether parametric or non-parametric statistical were applied. Also, we use the hypothesis test were applied to determine if there were significant difference in BTEX concentration at different sample times. In this part, we use the Levine test and Bartlett test, and also we used bivariate analysis, Pearson correlation analysis, and the multivariate analysis were carried out to determine if there were relationship between the different variables measured. And all of these analysis we use in the software Excel stat for Excel version 2016. Well, in the table number 1, we can see an example of the descriptive statistic of benzene, and the figure number 8, we presented a sedimentation graph that represents the total variability of the data. For the part of the meteorological analysis, the analysis of the frequency of occurrence of the winds we talk about direction and speed was carried out for each day of the sample period. The daily wind rows were constructed using NOAA Air Resource Laboratory ARL wind rows statistical tool. We can say an example in the figure number 9. We can see the below is a typical windrows representative of the sampling period. As can be seen, the prevailing winds blew from the east and in the southeast. In the figure number 10, we can see the air mass trajectory of model for the sampling period at the study site, where it can be seen that the air masses come from the Caribbean Sea. In the part of the health risk analysis, this study used the methodology proposed by Sang and USEPA to determine daily exposure, lifetime cancer risk, and non-cancer potential. For this part, for the daily exposure, we calculate with concentration times inhalation rates times duration of the exposure and divide by the body weight. For the lifetime cancer risk, we calculate with daily exposure. For the risk factors slope for the inhalation of toxic substances, and the part of the non-cancer potential will calculate with concentration between the dependent factor. Well, according to the World Health Organization, cancer is one of the leading causes of mortality among children and teenagers worldwide. Around 300,000 children between the age of 0 and 19 years old are diagnosed with cancer each year here in Mexico. In the problem solution, the relative abundance of BTEX in ambient air at the study site was as follows. We presented in order of purity benzene, toluene, xylene, and ethylbenzene. it's important to see the BTEX showing a diurnal behavior, also higher concentration values during the noon and afternoon periods, and the lower concentration values during the morning. Also been seen in ethylbenzene with higher concentration than a study conducted 10 years earlier at the same site. For the BTX concentration in the ambient air at the study site, the results are comparable to those obtained at the other side of the studies, León, Guanajuato, Mexico City, Beijing, China. In when as can be seen, benzene and ethylbenzene showed a higher concentration this year than the study carried out 10 years earlier at the same site, while the toluene and xylene showed a decrease. Both the benzene concentration in this study were comparable to the values reported in Beijing, China, but higher than those reported in León, Guanajuato, and Mexico City. In toluene presenting a lower values than those reported in León, Guanajuato, and Mexico City. Also, ethylbenzene represented a concentration higher than Beijing, China. And finally, for the xylenes, in this study presenting higher concentration that's reporting in cities of Beijing, China, and León, Guanajuato here in Mexico. Well, in this part, we have the concentration for the BTX in general, and we can see the behavior for all of them is the same. The higher concentration we have in the evening and the night in B2 and B3, and the lower concentration we have in the morning in B1. This behavior is for all of the BTEX. Benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylenes. In this part, we have the Pearson correlation matrix show that all of the BTEX had positive linear correlations. This kind of behavior indicating that they organized from the same sources. A significant moderate correlation was found between the toluene and the xylene because in this part we can found between the toluene and the atmospheric pressure we have a value around the 0.551 and a significant linear correlation between the temperature and the relative the temperature and the solar radiation with the value 0.851. The significant negative correlation were recorded between the relative humidity and the temperature. We can negative value with a 0.923. And between the relative humidity and solar radiation, we have a negative value 0.808, indicating that the higher the moisture contained in the air decrease the temperature and is associated with a reduction of the solar radiation levels due to the great cloud cover. In this part, we have the principal components analysis applied to the data set. Two principal components, F1 and F2, were obtained, which together have the 82.5% to the total variability of the data. In this figure, show the big plot of the main component F1 and F2. We can observe a strong relationship between the BTEX measured in the upper right quadrant and a strong correlation between a temperature and solar radiation in the upper left quadrant, and a strong negative correlation between the pair's temperature and solar radiation and a wind direction relative humidity located in diametrically opposite in a B plot. In this part, we have the reason of the BTEX. The BTEX ratio results from the ratio of toluene concentration between the benzene and xylene and ethylbenzene. They are widely used as they are useful to identify the probable origin of the BTEX during a given period, being able to evaluate the emission come from the mobile sources, that is a cars, or from the area source, toluene benzene radio, and fresh or age for the reason xylene and ethylbenzene radio. The reason toluene and benzene radio are used indicator of vehicular traffic emission, being a benzene and toluene constituent, principal constituent of the gasoline. And for the case for the xylene and ethylbenzene radio, is commonly used as an indicator of the photochemical age of the air mass at a given site. Values greater than 3.80 indicate all air masses, and values less than 3.8 indicate that air masses are fresh. It is mean recent emissions. This reason is related to the atmospheric lifetime of these pollutants in the air. Low value of the radio indicate that air masses are fresh, recent emissions. In turn, high values are indicators of the all air masses. The result, we have a value for the toluene benzene radio, 0.976, and the concentration for the recent radio xylene and ethylbenzene, we have a result 1.043 that for this case. For this methodology, we use that the said Elvir and Kuntasal. In this table, show the carcinogenic and non-carcinogenic risk radios to which the population may be exposed by inhalation of BTEX at this the measured concentration. And in this case, it can be observed that there are risks of cancer LTCR values that exceed the permissible limits established by the EPA and HUM. And being this level of risk higher in the children, death no cancer risk radio did not exist. The maximum permissible level established by the EPA, indicating that the risk of developing respiratory and cardiovascular disease from BTEX inhalation at this study site is low. The conclusion that the relative abundance of BTEX in the ambient air at the study site was as follows: benzene, toluene, xylene, and ethylbenzene, showing a diurnal behavior with higher concentration values during the noon and afternoon periods due to great mobility by the population in the study area, and also resulting in a high vehicular type emission. And from the analysis of the Pearson correlation and the principal component, it was observed that all of the beta showed a strong correlation. It was observed that all of the beta showed a strong correlation with each other, indicating that they organize from the common source. And from the meteorological analysis, it was found that the prevailing winds blew from the east and southeast, indicating that vehicular emissions from the avenues located in this direction could be contributed to the levels of BTEX measured. In the part of the reason toluen en vincien en Chilean ethyl benzene reaction, fresh emission, and the air masses containing them were local. From the analysis of the health risk, it was found that there is a possible risk of developing cancer in the lifetime of the measured concentration, being more critical for the children population, and the level of risk of developing cardiovascular and respiratory disease from the BTEX is low. Thank you a lot for your attention. My name is Vichique.